The auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden block with a crack that silenced the rowdy saloon in Marysville, California, 1876. "Next up, we have something special for you gentlemen, two sisters, sold as a pair," he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd of miners, ranchers, and drifters. Rose Gallagher stood on the makeshift stage, her fingers intertwined protectively with those of her younger sister Eliza, who stared sightlessly ahead, her clouded blue eyes evidence of the illness that had taken her vision 3 years prior. 21 and 18, healthy and hardworking, the auctioneer continued, parading them like cattle. "The elder can cook, clean, and sew. The younger is blind but has nimble fingers for simple tasks." Rose felt her face burn with shame as men appraised them openly, some with gazes that made her skin crawl. The sisters had been desperate since their father died on the journey west, leaving them penniless in a harsh new territory. Their mother had passed years earlier, and now they faced the unthinkable being sold into servitude to pay their father's debts. "We start the bidding at $50 for the pair," the auctioneer called. "I'll give 20 for just the elder," a gruff voice called from the back. 30 for the pretty one," another shouted. Rose tightened her grip on Eliza's hand. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I won't let them separate us." But her heart hammered against her ribs. How could she protect her sister when she had no power at all? 45 for both," called a red-faced man with alcohol on his breath. Rose recognized him as the owner of the mining camp brothel. She felt bile rise in her throat. $100. A deep voice cut through the crowd. The room fell silent as the crowd parted. A tall figure moved toward the front, a man in a dust-covered duster, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He looked up, revealing a strong jawline with several days' growth of beard and eyes the color of a summer sky. $100, he repeated, "for both sisters." The auctioneer raised his eyebrows. $100 from Mr. Jackson McCallister. "Do I hear 110? The brothel owner scowled but shook his head. No one else spoke up. "Sold to Mr. McCallister for $100. Rose felt dizzy with fear as the stranger approached, counting out bills from a worn leather wallet. What did this man want with them? At least they would stay together, but for what purpose? The man McCallister completed the transaction and approached them. Up close, Rose could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting years spent squinting against the sun. "My wagon's outside," he said simply, his voice low. "Can your sister walk?" Rose nodded, her chin lifted defiantly. "She can." "But where are you taking us?" "My ranch, about 3 hours from town," he answered, then bent slightly to address Eliza directly. "Miss, I'm Jackson McCallister. I'll be looking after you and your sister now." Eliza turned her face toward his voice. "You bought us both." "Yes," he said. "I'll take care of both of you." Rose searched his face for some hint of his intentions but found only weariness, and something else. Was it compassion? "Why?" Rose asked bluntly as he escorted them outside to a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. McCallister helped Eliza up first with surprising gentleness. "My sister was blind," he said quietly. "Died of fever 2 winters ago. No one should be separated from family." He turned to help Rose up, but she climbed in herself, still wary. "I need help at my ranch," he continued, climbing onto the driver's seat. "Cooking, keeping house. Nothing improper. You'll have your own room, meals, fair treatment." Rose didn't believe him, couldn't afford to. Men didn't spend good money on women without expecting something in return. But for now, they were together, and that was all that mattered. As the wagon pulled away from Marysville, Rose held Eliza close and watched the town disappear behind them. The road ahead wound through golden hills dotted with oaks, the September sun baking the land. Dust kicked up by the wagon wheels coated their skin and clothes, but Rose hardly noticed. Her mind raced with possibilities for escape, for survival, for keeping Eliza safe. Jackson McCallister said little during the journey, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning of a rough patch in the road. Hours passed, and the landscape gradually changed. More green appeared as they approached the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Finally, they turned onto a narrow track that led to a clearing where a modest but well-built cabin stood. A barn and corral sat nearby, and pastureland stretched beyond. "Circle M Ranch," McCallister announced. "It's not much, but it's home." Rose took in the sturdy log cabin, the vegetable garden to one side, the chickens pecking in the yard. It looked peaceful, ordinary, not at all what she had expected. "Where are the other ranch hands?" she asked suspiciously. "Don't have any permanent ones." "Hire temporarily for branding and roundup. Rest of the time it's just me." He jumped down from the wagon and came around to help them. "Must be hungry. I'll show you inside, then tend to the horses." The cabin was simple but clean, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and several chairs. A small kitchen area occupied one corner. 2 doors led off the main room. "That's my room," McCallister said, pointing to one door. "And that will be yours," he added, indicating the other. "It's small, but I put in 2 beds." Rose cautiously opened the door to find a modest room with 2 narrow beds, a small chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the garden. It was plain but tidy. "I'll bring your things," McCallister said, and disappeared outside. Rose turned to Eliza, who was running her hands over the back of a chair, exploring her new surroundings. "What do you think?" she whispered. "He seems kind," Eliza replied softly. "His voice is gentle when he speaks to us." "Don't be fooled," Rose warned. "Men are seldom what they seem." "You're always so suspicious, Rose." "It's kept us alive so far," she replied. McCallister returned with their single trunk, setting it inside their room. "I'm afraid supper's simple tonight, beans and cornbread." "Tomorrow you can cook if you'd like." Rose nodded stiffly. "I can cook." He hesitated, seeming awkward now. "I'll be outside tending to chores. Make yourselves at home. Door has a lock from the inside," he added, pointing to the heavy wooden latch on their bedroom door. After he left, Rose explored the cabin more thoroughly, memorizing the layout for Eliza's benefit. She described everything in detail: the stone chimney, the bearskin rug before the hearth, the rack of guns on the wall, the bookshelf surprisingly full of volumes. "He reads?" Eliza asked, surprised. "Apparently," Rose replied, examining the title's history. "Some poetry, practical manuals on ranching and animal care." Not what she expected from a rough cowboy. The evening passed quietly. McCallister served the promised beans and cornbread, ate quickly, then excused himself to finish evening chores. Rose helped Eliza prepare for bed, and they retreated to their room early, locking the door securely. "We should rest tonight," Rose whispered, "but we need to plan. I don't trust him." "He hasn't done anything threatening," Eliza pointed out. "Not yet," Rose replied, but even she had to admit their circumstances could be much worse. In the morning, Rose woke to the smell of coffee. She found McCallister already up, stoking the fire. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot if you want some. I'm heading out to check on a calf born yesterday. Take your time getting settled." He pulled on his hat and left without another word. Rose explored the kitchen, finding it reasonably well stocked. By the time Eliza woke and McCallister returned, she had breakfast-ready: eggs from the henhouse and biscuits she'd found the makings for. McCallister looked surprised. "Thank you," he said simply, washing up at the basin before sitting down. "It's what you purchased us for, isn't it?" Rose said coldly, To keep house. He met her gaze steadily. I purchased your contract to keep you from worse fates. You're not slaves here. Once you've worked off the $100 at fair wages, you're free to go if you wish. Rose stared at him, stunned. You mean that? I don't lie, Miss Gallagher. Over the next week, they settled into a routine. Rose cooked and cleaned while McCallister taught Eliza to feed the chickens, showing her how to navigate the yard using landmarks she could feel with her feet or hands. He was patient with her, never showing frustration when she occasionally dropped eggs or bumped into things. Rose watched their interactions carefully, still suspicious, but increasingly confused by his behavior. He never attempted to enter their room, always spoke respectfully, and worked from dawn until dusk caring for his modest herd of cattle and the small farm. One evening, as Rose was finishing the dishes, she heard something unexpected music. Following the sound, she found McCallister sitting on the porch, playing a fiddle with surprising skill. Eliza sat beside him, her face lifted in pleasure at the sound. That's beautiful, Rose said, startled into honesty. McCallister looked up, a hint of embarrassment crossing his face. My mother taught me, said every house needs music. Our mother played piano, Eliza offered, before she died. I'm sorry, McCallister said. Losing a mother is hard. You lost yours too, Rose asked, sitting down on the porch steps. 5 years ago, Father followed a year later. It's been just me since then. He resumed playing, a melancholy tune that spoke of loneliness and loss. Rose found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks as the music washed over her. In the fading light, with Eliza swaying gently to the melody beside him, McCallister looked different, younger, less weathered, almost handsome. The thought startled her, and she quickly pushed it away. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves. Rose and Eliza had been at Circle M Ranch for nearly a month. The $100 McCallister had paid for them was being steadily worked off. He kept meticulous records of their wages in a ledger, showing Rose the calculations each week. One morning, as Rose was kneading bread dough, McCallister entered the cabin with an excited expression. There's a box social at the church in Bear Valley this Sunday, he announced. Thought you ladies might like to go, meet some neighbors, get off the ranch for a bit. Rose hesitated. Part of her longed for other company, but another part feared what people might think, seeing her and Eliza with McCallister. Would it be appropriate? She asked carefully. Understanding crossed his face. The widow Perkins can chaperone you. She's a good woman, lives about a mile down the road. I've already asked her. Rose felt a rush of relief and something else, appreciation for his consideration of their reputation. We'd like that, she said. Thank you. Sunday arrived clear and bright. Rose dressed carefully in her best dress, faded but clean, and helped Eliza do the same. McCallister appeared wearing a clean shirt and his least worn trousers, his unruly hair slicked down with water. You both look lovely, he said awkwardly. They picked up the widow Perkins, a cheerful woman in her 60s who immediately took to the sisters. So glad Jackson's finally got some company out at that lonely ranch, she said. Been telling him for years he needs to find himself a wife. Rose saw color rise in McCallister's cheeks as he focused intently on the road ahead. The church social was lively, with most of the county in attendance. Rose felt eyes on them as they arrived, heard whispers. McCallister must have sensed her discomfort because he leaned close. Hold your head high, he murmured. You've nothing to be ashamed of. The widow Perkins proved an excellent ally, introducing them around as Jackson's housekeepers, with such matter-of-fact confidence that most people accepted it without question. While Eliza sat with a group of older women who were teaching her to braid strips of fabric into rugs by feel, Rose found herself by the refreshment table with McCallister. Having a good time, he asked. Better than I expected, she admitted. People are kinder than in Marysville. Most are decent folk, he agreed, just trying to carve out a living like everyone else. A man approached them tall, well-dressed, with a confident manner. Jackson McCallister, he greeted. Rare to see you at these gatherings. Richard, McCallister nodded. Miss Gallagher, this is Richard Thornton. Owns the biggest spread in the county. Charmed, Thornton said, his gaze lingering on Rose in a way that made her uncomfortable. Perhaps you'd honor me with your company for a while, Miss Gallagher. Before Rose could respond, another voice joined the conversation, a woman's, sharp with displeasure. Jackson McCallister. I was beginning to think you'd become a hermit. A striking blonde woman in an expensive dress approached, eyes fixed on McCallister. Victoria, he said stiffly. How are you? Better than when you refused my father's offer last spring, she replied coldly, then turned her attention to Rose. And who is this? Rose Gallagher, McCallister said. She and her sister are working at my ranch. Victoria's expression shifted to one of superior amusement. Ah, I see. Well, Miss Gallagher, enjoy your position while it lasts. With that, she took Richard Thornton's arm and steered him away. Who was that? Rose asked, watching them go. Victoria Barnes. Her father owns the bank in Bear Valley. McCallister's voice was flat. He wanted to buy my land. I refused. And she wanted to marry you, Rose guessed. McCallister looked surprised. How did you know? Women can tell these things, Rose said. Why did you refuse her? She's beautiful and clearly from money. A muscle tightened in his jaw. I don't care about her money. And beauty isn't everything. On the ride home, Eliza fell asleep against Rose's shoulder. The widow Perkins chattered happily about the social until they dropped her off at her cabin. Then silence fell, broken only by the steady clop of hooves and the creak of the wagon. Thank you, Rose said finally. For taking us today, McCallister nodded. You deserve more than just work. That woman Victoria, she seemed upset with you, he sighed. Her father's been trying to buy up all the small ranches around here. When I refused to sell, he suggested I might want to consider his daughter instead, as if she were another piece of property to acquire. And you didn't want that. I believe marriage should be a choice, freely made by both parties, he said quietly. Not a business arrangement. Rose thought about his words long after they'd returned home and she and Eliza were tucked into their beds. She'd never met a man who thought that way about marriage or about women, for that matter. Her father had been kind but traditional, viewing women as creatures to be protected and directed. McCallister seemed to see them as people. The next morning, Rose was collecting eggs when she heard an unfamiliar wagon approach. Stepping out of the henhouse, she saw a man climbing down middle-aged, expensively dressed with hard eyes. Where's McCallister? He demanded without preamble. Checking fences on the north pasture, Rose replied, immediately disliking his tone. And you are, Rose Gallagher. I keep house here. His eyes narrowed, assessing her in a way that made her want to cover herself despite her modest dress. I see. Tell McCallister that Albert Barnes came by. I have a new offer for him 20% higher than last time. He'd be a fool to refuse. I'll tell him, Rose said coolly. Barnes turned to go, then paused. Miss Gallagher, a word of advice. McCallister's a stubborn man fighting a losing battle. This land will be mine eventually. If you're smart, you'll find a more promising situation. After he left, Rose found her hands shaking with anger. When McCallister returned hours later, she told him about the visitor. His expression darkened. Barnes won't take no for an answer. Why is he so determined to buy your land specifically? McCallister hesitated, then motioned for her to follow him. They walked to a small stream that ran through the property, where he knelt and scooped up a handful of water, letting it run through his fingers. "See how it glitters," he said. "There's gold in this creek. Not much, nothing like the big strikes, but enough that Barnes wants it. I found it 2 years ago. Keep it quiet. Use what little I find to supplement the ranch income in lean times." "Why not sell?" Rose asked. "You could live comfortably." His eyes scanned the land, taking in the rolling hills and distant mountains. "This was my parents' dream, a place of our own, where we answered to no one. I won't dishonor their memory by giving it up." Rose understood then why he'd been so determined to rescue them from the auction. He knew what it meant to be owned, to be stripped of choice and dignity. November brought the first frost and a new routine. With winter approaching, McCallister worked to prepare the ranch, chopping wood, smoking meat, repairing the cabin roof. Rose preserved vegetables from the garden and made candles from tallow. Eliza proved adept at carding wool from the small flock of sheep McCallister kept, her sensitive fingers working the fibers with precision. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire. Sometimes McCallister read aloud news from old papers that came wrapped around supplies, or stories from his small collection of books. Other times, he played his fiddle while Rose mended clothing and Eliza worked on her rug braiding. They talked more freely now about their lives before, their families, their dreams. Rose learned that Jackson had fought briefly in the war as a very young man, had prospected unsuccessfully before returning to ranching, his family's traditional livelihood. He spoke of his sister Elizabeth, blind from birth, who had taught him patience and a different way of seeing the world. In turn, Rose shared stories of growing up in Boston, of her father's work as a carpenter, of their decision to head west after her mother's death from consumption. She spoke of caring for Eliza when scarlet fever took her sight 3 years ago, of the long journey west, of their father's death from pneumonia shortly after they reached California. "He'd borrowed money for the journey," she explained one evening. "When he died, the lender claimed we were responsible for the debt. That's how we ended up." She couldn't finish. "At the auction," McCallister completed, his voice hard, "a practice I've always found despicable." "Yet you participated," Rose pointed out. "To stop something worse," he replied. "I couldn't stand by and watch." Their eyes met across the room, and something shifted between them, a new understanding, perhaps even trust. One crisp morning in late November, Rose woke to find Eliza feverish and coughing. Fear gripped her heart. Illness had taken their mother, had taken Eliza's sight, and now threatened again. McCallister didn't hesitate. "I'll ride for the doctor in Bear Valley," he said, already pulling on his coat. "Keep her warm and try to get her to drink." He returned hours later with Dr. Wilson, an elderly but sharp-eyed physician who examined Eliza thoroughly. "Bronchitis," he pronounced. "Serious, but not pneumonia yet. Keep her warm, steam to help her breathe, willow bark tea for the fever." He left medicines and detailed instructions. For the next 3 days and nights, Rose barely left Eliza's side. McCallister took over most of the household duties without complaint, bringing meals and fresh water, stoking the fire to keep the room warm. On the second night, when Eliza's fever spiked dangerously high, Rose finally broke down, sobbing with exhaustion and fear. Without a word, McCallister sat beside her and put an arm around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. "She's strong," he said simply. "Like her sister." Rose found herself leaning into his strength just for a moment. "I can't lose her too," she whispered. "You won't," he promised. "Not if we have anything to say about it." True to his word, Eliza's fever broke the next morning. As she began to recover, Rose realized something had fundamentally changed in her relationship with Jackson McCallister. The wall of suspicion she'd maintained had crumbled, revealing the man behind it, honorable, kind, steadfast. December arrived with snow dusting the mountains and chilling winds that found every crack in the cabin walls. McCallister worked to seal the drafts while Rose hung thick quilts over the windows at night. Despite the cold, the cabin felt warmer somehow, more like a home than just shelter. One evening, as Christmas approached, McCallister cleared his throat awkwardly during dinner. "I need to ride into town tomorrow for supplies. Thought you might like to come along, do some Christmas shopping." "Christmas shopping?" Eliza echoed, her face lighting up. "Oh, Rose, could we?" Rose hesitated. "We don't have much money." Despite the wages McCallister paid them, most had gone toward working off their debt. "Consider it an advance," he said, "or a Christmas bonus if you prefer." The next day they bundled into the wagon with heated stones wrapped in flannel at their feet. The journey to Bear Valley took longer in the winter conditions, but the town looked cheerful with evergreen boughs decorating the storefronts. While McCallister attended to ranch business, Rose and Eliza explored the general store, carefully selecting small gifts: tobacco for McCallister, candy for each other, a few simple necessities. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Peterson, helped Eliza feel different fabrics and items, treating her blindness with matter-of-fact kindness. "Your employer seems a good man," Mrs. Peterson commented as she wrapped their purchases. "He is," Rose agreed, surprising herself with how readily she said it. "Been alone too long, that one," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Since his sister passed. Good to see him with company now." As they left the store, Rose nearly collided with Victoria Barnes, who was entering with her father. "Miss Gallagher," Victoria said coldly. "Still playing housekeeper at Circle M. How quaint." Before Rose could respond, Albert Barnes spoke up. "Ah, one of McCallister's girls. Tell him I'm raising my offer one last time. After the new year my patience ends." "Is that a threat, Barnes?" McCallister's voice came from behind Rose. He'd approached without her noticing, his expression hard as he faced the banker. "Simply business," Barnes replied smoothly. "Every man has his price. I'll find yours eventually." "Not for my land," McCallister said firmly. "Ladies, are you ready to go?" Outside, Rose asked. What did he mean about his patience ending? McCallister's jaw tightened. "Nothing to worry about," but Rose wasn't convinced. "Jackson," she said, using his given name for the first time, "if there's trouble coming, we should know." He sighed. "Barnes has connections with the railroad. Rumors say they're planning a line through the valley. If that happens, he stands to make a fortune from the land he's acquired if he controls the water rights. My creek is the most reliable water source for miles. Can he force you to sell?" "Not legally, but men like Barnes don't always concern themselves with legalities." He helped them into the wagon. "Enough about Barnes. It's Christmas soon, let's not let him spoil it." Christmas at Circle M turned out to be the happiest Rose could remember since childhood. McCallister surprised them with a small pine tree cut from the higher slopes, which they decorated with strings of dried berries and paper ornaments Eliza crafted. Rose baked honey cakes from her mother's recipe, and McCallister contributed a wild turkey he'd shot. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged their modest gifts by firelight. McCallister seemed genuinely touched by the tobacco and the knitted scarf Eliza had made him. For Eliza, he had carved a small music box that played a sweet, simple tune when the handle was turned. Her face glowed as her fingers explored the smooth wood. For Rose, he presented a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book of poetry Tennyson, well worn but clearly cared for. "It was my mother's," he explained. "You mentioned you liked poetry, and I've seen you looking at my books." Rose was speechless. To give something so personal, so precious, it spoke volumes about how he valued her. "I can't accept this," she said finally. "It's too valuable to you." "I want you to have it," he insisted. Books should be read, not just kept. My mother would have approved." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, connection, and perhaps something more. Rose felt her cheeks warm and looked away first. After Eliza went to bed, Rose and Jackson sat by the fire, talking quietly. "I've been calculating," he said, showing her the ledger. "You and Eliza have worked off the debt. You're free to go whenever you wish." Rose stared at the neat columns of figures. Freedom, what she'd wanted since that terrible day at the auction. Yet now, faced with it, she felt uncertain. "Where would we go?" she asked softly. "You could stay," he offered, his voice carefully neutral. "As paid employees, or—" he hesitated. "Or," she prompted. "Or whatever you want to be," he said, meeting her eyes directly. The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them. Rose's heart beat faster. "Jackson," she began, but a sudden pounding at the door interrupted them. McCallister was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle above the fireplace. "Who's there?" he called. "Widow Perkins' boy, sir," came a young voice. "Ma sent me. There's trouble coming." Mr. Barnes' men were drinking at the saloon, talking about running you off your land tonight. Said they were gonna burn you out. Jackson's face hardened. "How many?" "6 or 7, sir. They were saddling up when I snuck out." "Good lad. Get home to your mother now and stay inside." Jackson turned to Rose. "Wake Eliza. Take only what you need. We'll use the root cellar. There's an old tunnel leads out to the creek bed. Miners dug it years ago." "You're coming too?" Rose asked, already moving toward Eliza's room. "I need to save what I can first," he replied, pulling on his coat. "Go, Rose. I'll be right behind you." Rose woke Eliza and helped her dress warmly, explaining in hushed tones. They grabbed blankets and a few personal items, then followed Jackson's directions to the root cellar behind the kitchen pantry. He had already lit a lantern and shown them the narrow tunnel entrance hidden behind stacked barrels. "Follow it straight out," he instructed. "When you reach the creek, go left, downstream. There's a stand of pines about half a mile down where you can hide. Wait for me there." "Jackson, please come with us now," Rose pleaded. "I need to free the livestock first," he said. "Can't let them burn in the barn." He cupped her face with one rough hand. "I'll find you, I promise." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. "Go, now." He pressed the lantern into her hands and headed back up the cellar steps. Rose led Eliza through the narrow tunnel, her heart pounding with fear, not for herself, but for the man they'd left behind. The tunnel was low and cramped, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. After what seemed an eternity, they felt cold air and emerged at the creek bank. From their position, they could see the ranch house in the distance. To Rose's horror, flames were already visible licking at the barn roof. Shouts and the crack of gunfire carried on the night air. "What's happening?" Eliza asked, clutching Rose's arm. "Fire," Rose said grimly. "We need to keep moving." They made their way downstream as instructed, but Rose couldn't tear her eyes from the scene behind them. The barn was fully engulfed now, and flames had reached the cabin. Where was Jackson? At the pine grove. They huddled together for warmth, waiting and listening. An hour passed, then 2. The distant glow of the fire began to fade. Still, Jackson didn't come. "Rose," Eliza whispered through chattering teeth, "we can't stay here all night. We'll freeze." Rose knew she was right. The December night was bitterly cold, and they had only the clothes on their backs and 2 blankets. She made a decision. "The Widow Perkins' place isn't far. We'll go there." Supporting Eliza, Rose led them through the dark woods, following the creek until they reached the road, then turning toward where she thought the widow's cabin stood. Every step was an act of faith, every sound in the darkness a potential threat. Finally, they saw lamplight ahead. The widow herself answered their knock, ushering them inside with exclamations of concern. "Thank the Lord you're safe," she said, helping them warm themselves by her fire. "I've been sick with worry." "Jackson?" Rose asked, dreading the answer. The old woman's face fell. "No word yet, dear. My boy went back to look after you left, but the place was still crawling with Barnes' men. He couldn't get close." Rose felt as though her heart were being squeezed in a vise. He could be hurt, or worse. "Jackson McCallister's not easy to kill," the widow said firmly. "That man's as tough as old leather and twice as useful. You rest now. Morning will bring news." But Rose couldn't rest. While Eliza slept on a pallet near the fire, Rose kept vigil at the window, watching for any sign of Jackson. As dawn approached, she spotted a figure limping slowly up the road. Without grabbing a coat, she ran outside. Jackson was barely recognizable, his face blackened with soot, his clothes singed, a bloody gash across his forehead. But he was alive. "Jackson," she cried, running to him. He looked up, relief flooding his exhausted face. "Rose," he breathed. "You're safe." "Eliza inside, sleeping," she assured him, supporting his weight as he stumbled. "What happened?" "Got the horses out," he said hoarsely. "Most of the cattle scattered. Barnes' men caught me coming out of the barn. Put up a fight, but there were too many." The widow helped them inside, clucking over Jackson's injuries like a mother hen. As she cleaned his wounds, he told them the rest, how he'd been beaten but managed to escape when the men became more interested in looting the cabin before burning it. "Everything's gone," he said, the reality of it seeming to hit him fully as he spoke the words. "The cabin, the barn, all of it." Rose took his hand, her own troubles forgotten in the face of his loss. "But you're alive. That's what matters." "I've got nothing left," he said hollowly. "No home to offer you now." "We never needed a fancy home," Rose said firmly. "Just somewhere safe with people who care for each other." The widow Perkins cleared her throat. "You'll all stay here until you sort things out," she announced. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to decide what's next." The next day, the sheriff from Bear Valley arrived at the widow's cabin. An imposing man with a walrus mustache, he listened gravely to Jackson's account of the attack. "Barnes' men, you say? Can you identify them?" "Every last one," Jackson confirmed. "Tom Rivers was leading them, Barnes' foreman." The sheriff nodded. "Rivers was found dead this morning, shot in the back. Barnes is claiming you did it, McCallister." Rose gasped, but Jackson's expression remained steady. "I fired at them, true enough, but Rivers was very much alive when I last saw him, and I don't shoot men in the back." "I believe you," the sheriff said, "but Barnes has influence. He's demanding your arrest." "On what evidence?" Rose demanded. "None that would stand in court," the sheriff admitted. "But that might not matter. Barnes owns half the county officials." "What are you saying?" Jackson asked. "I'm saying you might want to leave the area for a while. Let me investigate properly." "Run away," Jackson shook his head. "That's admitting guilt. Besides, where would we go?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow, looking between Jackson and Rose. "Miss Gallagher and her sister are under my protection," Jackson said firmly. "I see." The sheriff considered them thoughtfully. "Well, there is another option. Judge Parker arrives tomorrow for the winter court session. He's from Sacramento, not beholden to local interests. If you surrender yourself to him directly, request a fair hearing." "I'll do it," Jackson said without hesitation. The next day, they traveled to Bear Valley together, Jackson, Rose, Eliza, and the widow Perkins as a character witness. The town was buzzing with gossip about the fire and Rivers' death. Albert Barnes and his daughter Victoria were at the courthouse when they arrived, along with a crowd of onlookers. Judge Parker proved to be a thin, scholarly man with penetrating eyes and a reputation for fairness. He heard both sides, Barnes' accusations and Jackson's defense, in his temporary chambers. "This is a serious matter," the judge said finally. "Mr. McCallister, you're accused of murder and arson." "Ironic," Jackson replied, "considering it was my property that was burned." "Be that as it may, I need evidence, not assertions." "Sheriff, what have you found?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "Judge, I examined Rivers' body myself. He was shot from behind, but the bullet doesn't match McCallister's rifle, and I found this in Rivers' pocket." He produced a piece of paper. "It's a receipt for payment signed by Albert Barnes authorizing Rivers to remove obstacles at Circle M Ranch. Dated yesterday." Barnes' face went pale. "That proves nothing. I meant legal obstacles. Legal obstacles requiring 7 armed men in the middle of the night," the judge asked dryly. "Mr. Barnes, I believe you have some explaining to do. Sheriff, please detain Mr. Barnes pending further investigation." As Barnes was led away, protesting loudly, the judge turned to Jackson. "Mr. McCallister, you're free to go. The court extends its apologies for your loss." Outside the courthouse, Victoria Barnes approached them, her expression a mixture of anger and grudging respect. "You've ruined my father," she said to Jackson. "He ruined himself," Jackson replied. "I never wanted trouble with your family, Victoria." She looked at Rose, standing protectively at Jackson's side. "You really do care for her, don't you? Not just playing protector." "I love her," Jackson said simply. It was the first time he'd spoken the words aloud, and Rose felt them like a physical touch. Victoria nodded slowly. "Then I wish you well, despite everything." With that, she walked away, head held high. Rose turned to Jackson. "Did you mean that, what you said to Victoria?" His eyes met hers, honest and vulnerable. "Every word. I love you, Rose Gallagher. Have almost from the beginning, though I had no right to." "Why didn't you say something sooner? You were under my protection, in my debt. It wouldn't have been honorable to speak while that imbalance existed between us." He took her hands. "But now you're free, truly free. And I'm asking not as your employer or protector, but simply as a man who loves you, will you consider a future with me? You and Eliza both." Tears filled Rose's eyes. "I already have. I love you too, Jackson McCallister." Eliza, standing nearby with the widow Perkins, clapped her hands in delight. "Finally! I've known you two were in love for months." "Have you indeed?" Rose laughed through her tears. "I may be blind, but I can hear perfectly well," Eliza said smugly. "The way your voice changes when you speak to each other tells everything." The widow Perkins beamed at them all. "Well, now that's settled, what's next?" Jackson's smile faded slightly. "We still have no home. The ranch is gone." "Not entirely," the sheriff interrupted, approaching them. "The cabin and barn are lost, yes, but the land is still yours and the creek that Barnes wanted so badly. With his confession, you might even have grounds for compensation." Hope returned to Jackson's expression. "We can rebuild, not alone," Rose said firmly. "Together." The rebuilding of Circle M Ranch began as winter gave way to spring. Word of Barnes' plot spread through the county, and neighbors who had once been distant now rallied around the McCallisters. Men came with tools and timber, women with food and furnishings. Even the railroad company, learning of Barnes' underhanded tactics, offered compensation for right-of-way access to the creek enough to rebuild the ranch better than before. Jackson and Rose were married on a perfect May morning in 1877, with Eliza as Rose's attendant, and the widow Perkins beaming in the front row of the small church in Bear Valley. The same judge who had cleared Jackson's name performed the ceremony, lending an extra sense of justice to the proceedings. Their new cabin was larger than the old, with a proper bedroom for Eliza and a small music room where Jackson's fiddle and Rose's newly acquired piano sat side by side. The land prospered under their joint care, the cattle herd grew, and their reputation for fair dealing spread throughout the county. Eliza thrived in her new life, developing skills no one would have thought possible. She learned to help with the dairy cows, whose gentle dispositions matched her own, and started a small business selling her braided rugs and woven baskets in town. In time, she even found love of her own with the young doctor who took over when old Dr. Wilson retired. On the first anniversary of the fire that had nearly cost them everything, Rose and Jackson sat on the porch of their new home, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Rose smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her rounded belly where their first child grew. "Not one," she replied. "Everything that happened, even the auction, led us here. How could I regret that?" Jackson kissed her softly. "When I said I'd take care of both of you that day, I never imagined how much you would end up caring for me." "That's what love is," Rose said simply. "Taking care of each other." As twilight settled over Circle M Ranch, Jackson reached for his fiddle and began to play not a melancholy tune now, but one full of joy and promise. Rose watched his hands move over the strings and thought about the journey that had brought them together, from fear to trust, from suspicion to love, from auction block to home. They had built something precious from the ashes of their separate pasts. And as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above their home, Rose knew with absolute certainty that what they'd found together was stronger than any hardship, more valuable than any gold, and would endure long after the wild days of the West had faded into history.